American culture. History of America. American culture. A day for celebrating Western culture. America has soaked up influences from all other cultures, but created something distinctly American. American culture is a complicated subject, but we'll begin at the beginning, since there is nothing more. In the year 1492, Christopher Columbus discovered America. He was not the first man to set eyes on American soil, but he was the first to bring America to the attention of Western civilization. In so doing, he opened the way for the transmission of the myriad ideas which made up Western culture, from God, glory, and gold to capitalism and democracy. For better or worse, Columbus Day marks the day that Western culture first came to America, and is symbolic of all that it brought for every American who shares Western beliefs. "1776 was the year that brought the Declaration of Independence, which hurled defiance against a tyrannical king in the name of unalienable rights and the wealth of nations, in which Adam Smith set forth the principles of laissez-faire capitalism, which would bring freedom and previously unimagined wealth to the world. In 1690, in his second treatise on government, John Locke introduced the idea of natural rights into Western culture. In 1492, before classical liberalism had been introduced, Christopher Columbus, in the name of God, glory, and gold, discovered America. On the eve of the Enlightenment, Western culture was in sorry shape. Europe was racked by wars fought to expand the state. Tyrants ruled in the name of divine right of kings, and the Crusades had ceased in favor of local religious persecution, such as the Spanish Inquisition. Therefore, it is no coincidence that America's first dose of Western culture was a particularly bitter one. Overbearing Christian missionaries, slavery, confiscation of property, and outright extermination were the first imports from Europe. Undeniably, massive negative consequences arose from New World's exposure to the Old. With the coming of the Enlightenment and continued religious persecution by the monarchies of Europe, America became a haven for those who sought the freedom to build their own life by their own effort, to live by their own religion, and to conduct business without suffering under the massive taxation which funded the wars of Europe. This is how America came to reap the benefits of Western culture more fully than any of the old monarchies of continental Europe. The citizens of the United States enjoy an unequaled level of freedom and wealth due to the influence of Western culture. Sir Isaac Newton gave us calculus and classical physics. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. John Locke gave us a vision of government as a protector and a servant. The Founding Fathers gave us the Constitution. Adam Smith gave us laissez-faire capitalism, enabling America to undergo a massive industrialization which raised its entire population's standard of living and made it foremost in economic powers of the world. It is due to Western culture that we can take for granted things like internal combustion engines, gargantuan flying machines, indoor plumbing, computers, and also free speech, freedom of religion, private property, and so on. These benefits are enjoyed by all Americans and many other people all over the globe. Culture is not an inherited mantle, passed from parent to child like a family heirloom. Culture is a collection of ideas which individuals are free to adopt or reject as their own judgment demands. When Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492, his discovery marked a definitive turning point in American history. When he first crossed the Atlantic Ocean, seeking a passage to the Far East, he brought with him all the ideas of Western culture. Many of these ideas had tragic consequences for America's native inhabitants, and many of its positive aspects, including freedom, science, and individual rights were yet to come. In celebrating Columbus Day, we celebrate these aspects of Western culture which give us liberty, wealth, and a body of knowledge undreamed of by any cultures of the time. We celebrate reason, freedom, and rights. We celebrate ingenuity, ambition, and unfettered productivity. In short, while we must not forget the horrible cost paid by those who suffered from Western culture's shortcomings, Columbus Day also enables us to celebrate humanity at its best. Know much more about America. A few general cultural patterns cut across regional and political boundaries, and in many cases ignore major differences in the physical environment. These themes characterize the ways Americans have organized their country. Urbanization. Millions of Americans, most of them urbanites, prefer to consider their country as a basically rural place, and they seem to believe that this rurality provides the country with a basic national vigor. There is no longer much justification for this view of rural dominance. About 70% of Americans live in urban areas, and more than 40% are in areas of 1 million people or more. In 1990, the U.S. farm population numbered about 5 million, 2% of the population, a figure that has declined steadily since the first national census in 1790, when over 90% of all Americans were farmers. Several elements of urbanization are emphasized in our discussion. Cities have a particular form, a particular layout. Most American cities have a rectangular grid pattern, partly a result of cultural attitudes, partly a result of a desire for efficient transport before the automobile, and partly because that pattern is an easy way to survey the land. Within cities, there is a collection of industrial and commercial centers, residential areas, warehouses, and so on. The pattern of continuing and often rapid urban growth in the United States during the last 100 years, coupled with the increasing mobility of the urban population, has stimulated a great sprawling pattern of urbanization. In some areas, the result of urban spread is urban coalescence, with the edges of different urban areas meeting and blending. Industrialization. A substantial part of U.S. employment is related to manufacturing, either directly or indirectly. Most cities were founded and experienced their major periods of growth when manufacturing was the primary factor in urban growth. Today, there is substantial regional specialization in manufacturing, partly as a result of variations in the availability of industrial raw materials, and partly as the result of industrial linkages. Manufacturing concerns that produce component parts of some final product are located near each other, as well as near the final assembly site, to minimize total movement costs. Other important sources of variation include differences in labor availability or labor skills, in the quality of transportation facilities, and in local political attitudes. Regions tend to specialize in the production of whatever it is that they can best produce. And with this regional specialization has come regional interdependence. Few sections of America are truly self-sufficient in manufacturing, in spite of what local pride might lead us to believe. Geography of America. Geography of America. The dominant topographic features of the United States tend to extend north-south across the country. The interior of the country is a vast sprawling lowland that stretches from the Gulf of Mexico to the Canadian border and then on to Alaska. Geographers with an interest in landform development place this expanse of flat land and gently rolling hills in three different physiographic regions: the Atlantic and Gulf coastal plains, the interior lowland, which some split into the Great Plains and the Interior Plains, and the Canadian Shield. The Atlantic and Gulf coastal plains reach north along the east coast of the United States as far as the southern margins of New England. Underlying this area are beds of young, soft, easily eroded rock deposited in recent geologic time as shallow seas lapped back and forth across the land. These low plains extend well out under the ocean surface to form a continental shelf, which in places extends as much as 400 kilometers beyond the shore. Northward, the interior lowland, although noticeably hillier than the coastal plains, has almost no rough terrain. This region is like a saucer, turned up at the edges and covered with a deep series of sedimentary rocks. These sedimentary beds are generally quite flat. Most topographic variation is the result of local erosion, or, in the north, of glacial debris deposited during the Ice Age. The geological structure of the Great Plains differs little from that of the interior plains. The sedimentary beds dominate, although in the north they are broken by some eroded domes, most notably the Black Hills of western South Dakota. While nearly horizontal, the sedimentary beds do dip gently toward the west to a trough at the foot of the Rocky Mountains, where the Colorado cities of Denver and Colorado Springs are located. Here, the boundary between the Great Plains and the interior plains is marked by a series of low escarpments that indicate the eastern edge of the mantle of loose sediments eroded from the Rocky Mountains that covers the plains. The character of this massive interior lowland area has had a number of important influences on the economic and settlement history of the United States. In addition to the vast agricultural potential it provides, fully half the country can be crossed without encountering significant topographic barriers to movement. This facilitated the integration of both this region and the distant west into the economic fabric of the country. Nearly all of the interior lowland is drained by the Mississippi River or its tributaries. This drainage pattern assisted regional integration by providing a transport and economic focus for the land west of the Appalachian Mountains. Here, the figure shows the American map in different forms with the state and the abbreviations of states. East of the lowlands are the Sierra Nevada and the Cascade Mountain Ranges. The Sierra Nevada appears as though a massive section of earth was tilted upward relative to the areas to the east and west in what is called a fault block, with the highest, sharpest exposed face toward the east. Although the western approaches into the Sierra Nevada are reasonably gentle, on the eastern side the mountains rise in some places more than 3,000 meters. Volcanic activity was important in the formulation of the Cascades. Some of America's best-known volcanic peaks, such as Mount Rainier and Mount St. Helens in Washington, are found there. Climate. Climate is the aggregate of day-to-day weather conditions over a period of many years. It is the result of the interaction of many different elements, the most important of which are temperature and precipitation. Climatic patterns are a result of the interaction of three geographic controls. The first is latitude. The Earth is tilted on its axis with reference to the plane of its orbit around the Sun. As it makes its annual revolution around the Sun, first the northern hemisphere and then the southern are exposed to the more direct rays of the Sun. During the northern hemisphere's summer, higher latitude locations have longer days, with far northern points experiencing a period of continuous daylight. Daylight periods during the winter months are shorter at higher latitudes, whereas more southerly locations have both longer days and exposure to more direct rays of the Sun. The second control is based on the relationship between land and water. Land tends to heat and cool more rapidly than water. In a tendency called continentality, places far from large bodies of water experience greater seasonal extremes of temperature than do coastal communities. Parts of the northern Great Plains experience annual temperature ranges close to 65 degrees Celsius. Annual differences of as much as 100 degrees C, from 50 degrees C to minus 50 degrees C, have been recorded in some locations. The interaction of these climatic controls creates a pattern of climatic regionalization. In the East, the principal element in climatic variation is temperature. In the West, it is precipitation. In the East, the divisions between the climate regions are based largely on the length of the growing season, the period from the average date of the last frost in spring to the first frost in fall, and on the average summer maximum temperature or winter minimum temperature. In the West, average annual precipitation is the key, although moderated temperatures are an important aspect of the marine West Coast climate. In the East, the more northerly areas are generally drier. In the West, they are colder. In the East, the major influence on climatic variation is latitude. In the West, it is topography.